Okay, so I thought I would record this video, or rather this recording, and put something else in the background because I don't think I want to appear live on camera right now for this story in particular, because it's been on my mind for a while, and I guess I'm in the mood to share because it's a bit of an odd story, and I don't really know what to do with it, and maybe other people have experienced something similar to that. And if you got any advice, that'd be great. So let's just get started. It concerns my dad, and he's been in a relationship for the past 4 months, and he's already engaged, and probably they're going to get married sometime either later this year or early next year. I have no idea. So my dad in particular, he was married to my mom till about 91, and then he was single for about, I want to say 10 years or something. I'm not really sure exactly about the timeline there, but eventually he got together with another woman who we used to work with, and he spent about 17 years in a relationship with her. Now this woman, we'll call her wife number 2. Well, actually they never got married. Partner number 2. She was sane and pleasant, and the 17 years that we spent basically interacting with each other were fine, and I wouldn't say that she was super close with me, but things were good. And then suddenly I got a message from my dad. When was it? About, I think, a year and a half to almost 2 years ago. No, I think it was last year's summer. That he was now out and about in his camper van because his partner of 7 years had kicked him out because of some messages he'd found on his phone. I'm like, okay, that's sudden. And as it would turn out, it was actually a neighbor of mine that he had gotten in contact with. Since my dad is a bit of a white knight, and this neighbor in particular always looked like a defenseless woman who needed help, those two had kind of hooked up, and they had started exchanging messages with certain pictures. And because of my dad inability to understand how the iCloud works, all the kind of devices in his home with the girlfriend's devices as well were connected through the iCloud, so those pictures ended up there as well. And also, of course, he'd logged on to Facebook and all his different devices, so she was able to see exactly what he was sending back and forth with this other woman, and that's why she kicked him out. I'm not exactly surprised at that, and it's not speculation that he sent these messages because she printed them out and put them in my mailbox, so I have solid evidence of all the stuff that's been sent back and forth, and it was not pretty. So partner number 2, in my mind, was perfectly in her right to kick him out, and they haven't gotten back together since. Also, the woman that he was exchanging these messages with, he was only with her for a few months until he got back on his own feet, and then he was suddenly like, oh my god, she's too emotionally unstable, and this has to end. So that ended, and then he spent, I would say, about 5 months single in his new apartment, where he didn't really do much to change the look. It kind of looked like he had just moved in, even though he had been there for almost a year. At that point, he was almost there for a year. He was still sitting on his garden furniture with like just a TV being the main focus in the house, and the rest is still empty and no flooring for the longest time. And then we move on to a couple of weeks before last year's Christmas 2019. I start getting messages from him about this new woman that he's in contact with. And every once in a while he would actually want to go and get some stuff for his house, so I drive along with him, and he talked about her and what a great woman she was, about all of her history, stuff like that. And before I met her, it's like, okay, that's great, he's got a friend. I mean, one of my main concerns has always been like, how will I know that he's doing okay or not? Is he laying on his bed somewhere, collecting flies, if you know what I mean? Because the bonds in our family are not super strong. I mean, my parents, my brother and I, we only really see each other on like holidays, and since my parents were divorced, that means they don't see each other at all. So there's really not much in the ways of strong bonds here. And my dad and I, and my mom and I as well, by the way, and my brother and I, pretty much everyone in our family, we can't really talk to each other about serious issues. We don't talk about concerns, and we don't talk about how we're feeling, and we also don't drop in on each other for a cup of coffee. Everything, all the contact is basically announced beforehand, it's planned, and usually only revolves around birthdays and holidays, like I said earlier. And on top of that, at least at the time, I hadn't driven my car in a very long time, or a car for that matter. I hadn't driven a car for about 10 years, so I wasn't too confident behind the wheel, and he moved to an area that's outside of town, so I was not feeling too confident about driving there. So basically, there were long stretches of time that I just didn't have any contact with him outside of the occasional WhatsApp message and maybe a phone call. So the fact that he had a friend who was there in the same building and they were hanging out together seemed like a good thing to me. But then came Christmas, when we got to meet her for the first time. My brother and I were there around, I would say, 2 o'clock in the afternoon-ish, I think. And as per usual, we would just sit there and watch TV because we can't talk to each other about anything that's, I don't know, not a holiday or war documentary related, because my dad really likes the military and stuff like that. So normally we would wait until it was about dinner time where we could start the dinner, and then after dinner maybe have a cup of coffee, and then we'd go home. This time, he spent most of the time checking his phone to see if she'd left any messages, and maybe she'd called him or something like that. So I was already noticing, like, oh, he's really anxious about this woman showing up, because he had said something like, oh, you're invited to come over if you want, and I guess he thought he wasn't being direct enough, like he really wanted her to come over, but he didn't actually want to say it with that many words. So after a while he calls and he's like, oh yeah, we're here, and you can come over if you want. And of course she wanted, so she comes over. Now, first impressions, I don't tend to put too much faith in how a person looks, because they could be a really nice person. Of course, later first impressions get skewed a little bit after you have actually met the person. She looked, well, she's 65, so she says, and she looks 65. And she was wearing this really tight pair of leather pants, and you do you and all that sort of thing. But it was the first time I'd ever seen anybody above 60 or even above 40 with imitation leather pants on, which was an interesting thing. But okay, I'm gonna set my judgment aside. So she sits down on the couch, and for the next, I want to say 3 hours, she's talking. The entire time she's talking, and she's in my face. She's literally right next to me, up against me, in my face, talking. And it's not just normal conversation stuff. No, she is talking about how she's a medium and how she knows everything and how her and my dad are connected, and we got this karmic thing that needs to be worked out and all this other stuff. And she's talking about all these super personal things. And she's asking super personal questions. And the way she asks questions would be like this. She is in your face. Her eyes are super huge. And she asks something like, oh, what was it like then for you and your family? How did you guys grow up? And then I'd start to answer it. And then like a few seconds into my sentence, she holds up her hand like, no, I can feel it. And she does this weird gesture like, oh, she's receiving information from the ether or something like that. And I'm just sitting there looking at her like, okay, I was gonna say something rude. So when she's not actually in my face, she's turning around to talk to my dad and basically berating him for being such a terrible host, and you should do this for your kids, and you should do that for your kids, and you should have put this on the table by now, and what are you doing? You're so slow, you're so old and sick and unemotional and inattentive and all these other things. And my dad's just kind of letting it slide. He just mostly sat on the couch, almost laying down on the couch because he had like slid forward. And he was just letting everything happen, even when she started aiming her attention towards my brother, who was really not into this. Now, my brother is not particularly fond of strangers, but he really, really hates it when people start asking personal questions, start trying to pry into his private life. And I was actually really amazed with the amount of control that he showed, because I was expecting him to either leave or bite back or attack or something, maybe physically attack even, because there was a point, because I had the dog with me, that I had to feed the dog. So I got up off the couch, went into the kitchen, and I was standing there cutting up the dog food to put it in her bowl. I had this butter knife, and she had moved over to sit right in front of him because I was no longer on the couch, so she couldn't sit in anybody's face unless she moved. So she had sat right in front of him. She was like maybe a few inches away from his face, and she was like saying, oh, let me look into your eyes, I want to see what's happening in there. And it was like, oh my god, I might have to use this butter knife here to get him off of her, because I was not expecting him to stand for that type of thing at all. But amazingly, he did absolutely nothing. So this goes on for a while, and after a while I'm like, oh yeah, maybe we should maybe I should just walk the dog, because we're about to have dinner, right? Like looking at my dad like, isn't it time to do something? And she's like, oh, you're gonna have dinner? Oh, well, I'll leave soon then, sure. So I go and walk the dog, and that takes about 20 minutes. And I come back, she's still there, and it takes her at least another half an hour to finally get the hint and move on, because I'm thinking, we don't really know you, and this is Christmas, and even though we're not super religious, it is a family thing. If I were dating somebody, I would definitely not show up like a few weeks into meeting somebody to have Christmas with them, and I certainly would be very conscious of how people felt with my presence there. And if I had caught any of the hints of the people looking at the clock, or maybe like looking at the table, like maybe it's about time, I would have left. I probably wouldn't even have been there for those hints. I would have left a long time ago, but she had no such qualms at all. So it takes us actually physically sitting down at the dinner table, already putting food in our mouths, for her to finally go home. But not before dropping off some extra salad that she'd made at some point and insisting that we try it because it was such great salad and it was so healthy, because all of my dad's cooking was obviously shit and terribly unhealthy, and only she knows how to cook a good meal. So basically we had to try some salad, and when she was satisfied that we had actually chewed and swallowed something, she finally went home. Now, about a week later, of course, it's New Year's, and on New Year's Day, we went and did the same thing again. Went to my dad's place, my brother was there, and about half an hour into it, she was there as well, and of course, the whole same thing happened a second time. It's basically just a repeat of Christmas, and this time I was even more annoyed because I had seen her once, and my dad had seen her interact with us before as well. And just like last time, he did absolutely nothing to stop it or mitigate the situation, tell her to calm down, ask her to maybe leave. None of that. He thinks she's great, and all the time she's pushing him to say things to us that we normally wouldn't say to each other at all. She's like trying to have him open up, quote unquote, in front of us. Like, it was really uncomfortable. Like, we don't really have much of a connection, like I said. But she was like pushing for him to be emotional in front of us, and oh, your children need to see this, your children need to know that you're okay, they just want to know because they love you so much, and like, this is not your place. That's what I'm thinking, obviously, because I'm still trying to be nice because of my dad, because my dad really likes this woman, although I don't know why, but she's being really rude and just in his face, continuously in his face. Like textbook gaslighting is what I want to call it, because after these two visits I spent some time thinking and researching as well. I mean, I had read a book on narcissistic personality disorder not too long before meeting her, so it was kind of like almost like you read a book. I say like a lot, by the way. So you read a book about a certain topic and then you go out and you see it in practice, kind of like that. So I was wary of her now. I mean, I was wary of her after 5 minutes of meeting her on Christmas, but I was even more wary now, and I was trying not to come into contact with her at all. But my dad, one day, not too long after that, called me and said, hey, can you come over real quick, because, or at least as urgently as you can I pick you up after work tomorrow, because her printer doesn't work and she's got an issue with some USB drives that she needs to do something with, and she really needs to print stuff for her taxes, and can you come over as soon as possible? So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll just get out of this train station that's near you tomorrow after work, and you can pick me up and we'll take a look, but I can't stay too long because my dog will be home alone and she needs to be fed and walked, etc. So I'm only going to be there for the printer and nothing else, because I was trying to limit my interaction with her as much as possible. Matter of fact, during my lunch break on that day, I went to an electronics store to get a printer cable, because I thought maybe she's got this printer on Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi is not properly set up, and I don't feel like messing with the Wi-Fi because that always takes hours. I'm just going to get this printer cable, we'll hook it up directly, and then she can print, and then it's problem solved. That's how much I didn't want to spend time there any more than I had to. So I'm like prepped and ready to go by the time I get to the train station. I get to the place, I go into the little room that she set up as a mini office, which is basically just a storage space that she converted with a very thin, small desk with her computer and stuff on it, with the printer next to it. And she's already hovering over me like, oh yeah, I don't know what is happening. I don't know what happened there. It just doesn't work. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll take a look. And just give me a minute. So I turn on the printer and the printer just works. About 15 jobs come rolling out of the printer, and it's all this stuff on apartments that are for sale in Spain and all this other stuff. I'm like, okay, great. One of the things that really stuck with me of all the things that she had been talking about during Christmas and New Year's is that she kept repeating that she wasn't interested in money. And usually when somebody keeps saying things like, oh, I don't need any money, I have plenty of money, it's not about the money, I'm not interested in money, don't worry, I'm not interested in money. That means I'm interested in the money. Now my dad's not necessarily rich, but he drives a nice car and he's done well because he bought a house back in the early 80s and he paid off the entire mortgage. So he has a bit of money because he sold the house, although he did buy an RV after that, but he sold the RV, so he has a little bit of cash lying around, I suppose. And she apparently was married to this guy who owned his own garage, or maybe a few garages, like where he actually repaired people's cars. I think he owned 4 businesses or something, and she apparently had some type of beauty salon, although looking at her you wouldn't think it. That's not just me being mean. It really, if you saw a picture of her and then there was like a little text underneath saying this woman owned a beauty salon, you'd be like, how? Anyway, so yes. Let's quickly finish the whole printer debacle thing before I continue on the money thing, because there's a lot of suspicious things going on there. Anyway, so I go and tell her that the printer works, and she's like, oh, what did you do? And I'm like, I turned it on. And she's like, oh, that's silly of me that I didn't try that. It didn't seem to work, blah, blah, blah. So I'm like, okay, fine. And she starts like going through those things, those printouts. Oh, look, nice apartments in Spain. Oh, I'd like to live there, blah, blah. Isn't it nice? Isn't it lovely? Oh, and now the USB drives, because she had these 2 USB drives and there was something on there. She needed to send it to her sister, or somebody wanted it, or I don't know what it was. Turns out she has 2 USB drives, one of which contains a video of her husband's cremation, which occurred about a year ago at that point. And the other one was with a few music tracks which were played during that cremation as well. So she's like, how do I play this? I need to know how this is played. So I like show her how to put the USB drive in the computer. Oh, what happens then? Well, you get this thing. It says you want to open it. Yeah, just click open. Oh, that's very interesting. So how do you open the file? So I'm just like, okay, just double click it and it opens a media player. There it goes. So I show her that it opens a media player, and then I show her how to close it again. She goes, why'd you close it? Open it back up. And I'm like, okay. So I open it back up and she makes us basically walk through the video. Now the video is about, I don't know, about an hour long or something, however long those services usually last. And I have to skip through it every couple minutes, and then we pause and look at the footage of these people standing there in front of the casket, and you can see her sitting in the front pew, and every once in a while, whenever somebody shows up to talk about something, she's always like really negative about the people on the video. Everybody's there, there's something wrong with them, or they're only here for this, or they're only there for that, and blah blah blah. My dad's meanwhile sidled up to take a look at it as well. So I'm sitting there on this really low stool in front of the computer, and my dad's like standing up to right next to me on the left, and she's standing right next to me on the right, so I'm feeling like boxed in. And basically I'm a kid again because I'm the shortest one, and she's got her hand on my shoulder and like, oh, look at this, look at that, and all this other things. So finally we get through the video, and she's like, okay, now I got this other USB drive, how does that work? So I put that one in the computer and show her how to start those songs as well, and we have to listen to a couple of the songs, and one of them in particular was Crimea River. And if you know the song, it's more about this woman who's like, well, you've hurt me so many times, you can cry all you want, but I'm not coming back. But she explains it more like, oh, you, my dad, are crying so much, but I'm here to help you, and stuff like that, so it's completely incorrect. Of course, my dad's English is not great, and I think hers is worse, but she spins it in such a way to make it seem like the songs are so meaningful to them now, just as it was meaningful to her and her husband back then, because she's constantly making this comparison between him and her former husband and how they're so similar, and that's why they have this karmic thing that they need to work through. So basically just constantly reiterating why they need to be together. And it's really annoying and awkward and very cringy, but I have nowhere to go right now because I'm boxed in, and it's rude to kind of push my way out. So I suffer through that, as per usual in my life. I've suffered through so many weird manipulative situations, which is also why I'm very cautious about running into these people, because they have a certain way of trying to get under your skin and twisting your words, which is what she did as well once we were done finally with the music, because she was like, turn off the computer, that's fine. Oh, but you gotta go now, right? Because of your dog, you don't have any time, right? You don't even have time for a cup of coffee, right? And my dad's looking at me like, are you sure you don't have time for 1 cup of coffee? And like, I don't really have a reasonable excuse now, because I expected that it was going to take at least an hour, and it turned out to only take about 15 to 20 minutes. So technically speaking, I had time for 1 cup of coffee. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll have 1 cup of coffee. So I go and sit there for 1 cup of coffee, and of course within the span of the 15 to 20 minutes it took, she spends the entire time once again trying to get into his head. And this time she's talking about how much he wants to propose to her, because you really want to get married, right? Oh, don't you want to tell your daughter how much you want to marry me? That's all you're talking about, that you want to get married, right? And I'm like, excuse me, I haven't heard him say that once. So she goes, oh, ask him why he wants to marry me. I'm like, Dad, you can also just move in with her instead of just marrying. Why is marrying necessary? Always says, like, all conditions, like, I just don't want her to go away. I'm like, okay, this is not healthy. Also, this is not my dad, because the dad that I remember growing up with was not into any type of manipulation or people telling him what to do. But apparently that guy is gone, and now we've got this weird, slumped over slave guy who does everything that she says and agrees with everything she says, and just kind of plugs his ears when she starts talking about psychic stuff because he doesn't believe in that, thinking that it's just a temporary craze. And once she starts talking about normal things or she gives him a smile, everything's okay again. So that was awkward, and I go home after a while and I don't hear anything from him for a while, with the occasional message on WhatsApp, like I said, the usual. And then around Easter time, we have this whole coronavirus thing going on, so I can't go visit anyway, and I send him some chocolate for Easter, and he sends me a message saying, oh, that's nice, I'll send you a card as well. I'm thinking, okay, it's an Easter card, but the card I get is sent in her name, by the way, not from him, and it's an engagement announcement, because, oh, wonderful, they've gotten engaged, isn't that fantastic? So a couple days later, I get him on the line. He calls me, and his premise is that he needs to know how he can attach images to his WhatsApp messages, because apparently he's been struggling with that. So I'm explaining to him how to attach images on his WhatsApp messages, and oh, here's my girlfriend, she wants to talk to you, or my fiance now. I'm like, okay, great. Totally not expected. She starts asking me, how about that card? Wasn't it a great card? I think it's so lovely. It's so nice. What do you think about it? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm already annoyed. So I'm like, well, it wasn't that special, was it? I'm looking at it like it's just a simple card that you can order printed online, which is exactly how she explained it to me as well. Oh yeah, well, it's actually very special because you can just go online and order these and you can customize them completely. And I'm saying like, yeah, I know I do that for Christmas and stuff like that as well. Oh. Well, these are super custom cards and they're really good and blah blah blah, you need to try that sometime. I'm thinking to myself, did I not just say that I do that already? But okay, so after a while she hands the phone back, and then I get my dad back and I reiterate what I said before about how to attach the messages and stuff like that, or the pictures to the messages, and we hang up. Next day I get a WhatsApp message from him, and it says, we thought the reception to the engagement announcement was rather cool. And not in a cool way, but more like a cold way. So I'm like, okay, great. So what do I say to that? I wanted to say, since when has my opinion mattered to you at all? But what I said instead was, that's fine. That's okay. And I don't have to agree with everything that you do. And I made sure not to say, or do I, at the end of that, because then that would have been a point or a question that he could have answered with, well, actually, I think you should. I just made it a statement. I don't have to agree with everything that you say. And that was that. So then a couple of weeks go by, and now I've got a phone call from my dad last Sunday. He says, oh, it's your birthday soon, and you're invited. I'll come pick you up at that and that date and that time, and I'll see you then. And I'm thinking, I don't get a choice in this? What do you mean I'm invited and I'm going to come pick you up? Because you don't even know if I want to go yet. So I said, okay, I'll think about it. And then about an hour or two later, I sent a message saying, you know what? I'll think about if I want to go yet or not, and if I do go, I'll drive myself so you don't have to come pick me up. I'll send her a gift. And then a couple of days go by until today. I get a message back saying, well, I think sending a present is not very personable, and maybe do you have something against my fiance? Like, is there something wrong? And I'm thinking, what shall I say to that? Because now he's literally asking me if I think there's something wrong with his girlfriend or fiance, and I'm like, okay, I guess it's time to say something at least, because I can't just pretend that I just don't feel like it or something. So I say, okay, well, I don't feel like going over, And every time that I'm there, she's on your case, she's insulting you, and I don't think that's acceptable. And if you don't think it's acceptable for me to send the gift, then I'll just send nothing at all. There. And then he sends me a message saying, well, then just don't send anything because I will not stand for my fiancé being insulted, and have a good life or something along those lines. So I'm like, okay, great. Fine. So that's out in the open now. So now I'm wondering what he's going to start thinking next, because he's really under her spell. And of course, she knows everything that I'm sending him to his WhatsApp messages, because she probably reads everything. She's super jealous. And probably she's going to spend a lot of time now saying all sorts of terrible things about me, and probably also about my brother, because your kids are just so disrespectful and they don't appreciate anything that I do for you, or whatever it is that people say in those situations. And it's probably only going to get worse, and I'm going to have to, I don't know, stop answering phone calls perhaps. Because as long as she is there and he's still under her spell, he's not going to see any sense. I don't know how that works, because as I said, he used to be such a smart guy who was not into manipulation of any sort. But maybe age has made him weaker? I don't know exactly. He's currently like 72, so he's getting on in life, and his health is not great because he's always had a terrible diet and basically done no exercise. So he's not super fat, but he's just not healthy. He's got heart issues and all sorts of other things. So I don't know how long he's going to last, but I think with her, he's going to last less long than he could have lasted without her, because there are some things with her past that really worry me. Like, for instance, the previous husband that I was talking about, the one that got cremated a year ago, remember him? He was also apparently sickly, and he apparently a week or so before he died wrote a letter on the computer to her, which basically says something like, oh, you're such a great wife, and I would have never made it this far without you because I'm such a sick guy and you've taken such great care of me, you're wonderful, blah blah blah. Kind of sounds like something you would stick in with a resume, and since it was written on the computer, can we really know that it wasn't somebody else who wrote that? That is always so suspicious. Another thing, since we're now talking about the things that I think are suspicious, is she claims that she really loved this guy. She was married to him for like 31 years, and he was her soulmate and blah blah blah. He was cremated, so she had an urn with his ashes. And after moving into this apartment where she currently lives in the same building as my dad, she was like, oh, I hate this apartment, I don't want to live here for very long, I'm going to move out about a year and a half from now, we just wait and see. But she did also spread his ashes in the bushes right outside of her apartment. Now, those bushes and that entire building have no significance to either her or him. And if you were to have been married to somebody for 30 years and you're so in love with them and they're just the best person that you've ever met, why would you put their ashes in a place that you hate and that you know you're going to abandon within 2 years? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Seems a little odd. And I'm also hearing that she used to have children, she used to have a daughter, and she used to have a son. And the daughter was, I think, 48 or something by the time she passed away of some mysterious illness, not really sure what it was. And of the son, we have no information how he died, but he also died young. And it just makes me wonder, because one of the things she always talks about is how much she loves cooking, and she's always suggesting supplements to my dad. And this guy that she used to be married to was also quite sick and left her a resume letter, which makes me wonder what the heck's happening over there. It just makes me really suspicious, is what I'm trying to say, combined with the fact that she's always talking about how she doesn't need the money, and how her and my dad are destined to be together, even though he's a sickly old man who can't do anything right. Just makes me really suspicious what she's planning. So I don't think anything good is going to come from that situation. I think, since I see that we're reaching the half-an-hour mark, we're going to call it here, but I just wanted to share that. And if you have any similar experiences, make sure to leave a comment in the comment section below. If you have any advice, if you have similar experiences, make sure to let me know that as well, because currently I have no idea if there's anything that I can do, but I'm pretty sure that I have to sit on the sidelines for the time being, because she's there with him pretty much day and night, because they live in the same building and probably spend a lot of time in the same apartment. And I can't really get between the two of them because she's in his head and he doesn't want to hear anything else. So Who knows how it's going to end, but it's probably not going to end well. But I am going to end this video right here. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and thanks for your comments. And I'll see you in another video or stream or whatever. And bye for now.